All right. Hey, everybody. Thanks for being here. This is Cougar's Care number two, becoming a better listener. So hopefully that's where you are meant to be at. If you're not, I guess go to wherever you're meant to be at. But this is what we're doing here for the next probably about hour and a half. We're booked till about 2:30. Might get done a couple minutes early, but about that. So also those of you online, thank you for being here as well. As you probably heard the creepy computer voice just say, we are recording today's session, but we're only going to be recording like my lecture pieces, right? So throughout we'll have opportunities for interactions and discussion and things like that. We're not going to record any of those because that would be awkward and weird. So we're just going to record the lecture pieces. If I could have the next slide, Jordan. Today we're going to do active listening, right? So I hope that you'll leave here feeling equipped to like be a good listener in situations with friends, with partners, with family members, whatever. Like we're going to actually do some applied skills. So I'm going to talk boringly at the beginning just a little bit about what active listening is and why it's good. But then we'll jump right into four different things. We'll start with how to do effective attending behaviors, basically like nonverbals. And then we're going to do three different techniques for listening: paraphrasing, reflecting, and questioning. And then after that, we'll finish up with two techniques for empathic support, which are going to be feel, felt, found, and at Care I See, I Feel, I Want, I Will, which is like long, but it's written down in your packets as well. So as we're going through, all of this stuff is also in your packets. Next slide, please. I know a lot of you are here probably for maybe summer credits, or maybe you're here for your G100 class, or maybe you're here just because you love the sound of my voice. But regardless, if you need credits for this, for attending, please make sure that you stay all the way to the end and that you fill out our survey at the end with your name and your email address. We also have like feedback stuff, if how we did or whatever. You don't have to fill that out if you don't want to, but just make sure we get your name and your email address so we can confirm your attendance here and we can give you those summer credits or whatever. Next slide, please. Also, while we're here, this is going to be a somewhat interactive workshop. Now, this is not like group therapy or anything like that. I'm not going to ask anybody to bare your soul or anything like that, but I do want us to be able to talk about psychological topics. I do want us to be able to talk about what is effective listening. I want us to feel comfortable doing that. So just go ahead and like be cool with each other and respect each other's rights to their opinions. Also respect everybody's rights to ask questions. Everybody here is probably at a different area. Some of you are like fourth year psych majors. Some of you are like first year math majors, right? Like everybody's coming to this with a different level of pre-introduction. So there's no bad questions here. And the more questions we get, actually, like the better that these things typically go, because then you break me out of my flow of just going through the slides and I actually get to interact with you a little bit. So please ask questions. Finally, restrooms are right out through this door. If you're not familiar with the Ronald building, just through this door and just over like two doors that way. Those of you at home, use your own restrooms, whatever, but like they're in here. And also take a break. If you need to take a break for any reason, just go ahead and step out. And that should be good to go. I think that's all the ground rules I wanted to do. Feels good? Anybody any questions? Okay, let's jump into it. So first, becoming a better listener, I want to talk to you about active listening. What even is active listening, right? Well, this is like the major thing that psychologist Carl Rogers initially really came up with. So if you can give me the next slide, we got a quote here that active listening basically requires that we get inside the speaker, that we grasp from their point of view what it is they're communicating to us, and that we convey to the speaker that we're seeing things from their point of view, right? That's a lot of words, right? Carl Rogers typically writes a lot of words, right? But there's two pieces there that I want to highlight, right? When we are listening to somebody, to really make them feel like somebody heard them, right? They need to get what we're saying, and like they need to communicate that back to us, that they do understand us, right? And you can probably think about that yourself. There's some people in your life that are really good listeners. There are some people in your life that that are not good listeners, right? You can tell the difference between those two. And typically the difference is that like they get it from your perspective, not get it from their perspective, right? That they can really see what you're trying to come across with, right? And that's what I want to train you all to be able to do today. To be able to understand what somebody else is talking about from their point of view, empathetically putting yourself in their shoes, right? And then also have the opportunity to show them that's what you're doing, right? To be able to demonstrate that. Because even if you're getting it, right? But if you say nothing back, like if you're just talking to somebody and they're like a stone wall and they don't give you nothing back, like they may really be understanding you, but you still don't feel well listened to, right? So it's about both of those pieces, right? Understanding and communicating that understanding back to the person that's being listened to. So that's our goal for today. If you can give me the next slide. Um, the other thing about active listening that matters is that like people do these kinds of seminars, active listening seminars all the time. In fact, if any of you have like worked in like retail or sales or something like that, maybe you had a presentation on this in like your pre-employment training or something like that. If any of you becomes like a middle manager or a shift lead somewhere, they're probably going to try and teach you active listening because like it's a good skill set to have, right? The problem is that like if you just try and use what I'm teaching you today as tools, like if you try to fake it with these tools, it's not going to work out too good, right? Because like I said before, like the biggest part of listening is actually hearing and experiencing what somebody else is saying to you from their shoes, right? So the biggest thing to become a better listener is to care about the person that you're listening to, right? And I can't, no matter how good I am up here, I can't teach you how to care about somebody else. Like you gotta manage that on your own, right? And there's just some people you're not going to be great at listening to because you can't summon up the care, right? But like, hopefully, you can summon up the care for those people that are important to you in your life, right? Your roommate, your friends, your partner, whatever, right? Like, so just know that this isn't just a set of tools, right? But it's a set of tools to use to communicate what you're already like deep down in your heart trying to do. Next slide, please. So that's all my lecture bits. That's all the quoting random theoreticians out of the way. Let's talk about doing, right? Let's make this a little bit more of an applied lecture. So how do you communicate to somebody that you're listening to them? Well, it starts before you even say anything, right? You know, and theoretically, like listening is the opposite of talking. Right? You know, you can't be listening when you're speaking. So like a lot of listening comes down to your nonverbal behaviors, right? And so these are a few of like the suggestions that I have for like how we can best do that, how we can best pay attention to something, right? The first is like eye contact, right? So we're here like in like a Western American academic setting, right? I know eye contact operates differently in different cultures and different places around the world, but for the most part here, when somebody's talking to you, to show that you're listening, you look at them, right? You know, that's like a big key part about paying attention is showing that somebody's important enough to you for you to look at them, right? Now, don't be like weird about this necessarily. Like it'll be really sketchy if you just like stared like at the person that you're listening to, like really intently. Like don't do that, right? Like make normal amounts of eye contact. Like feel free to look away every once in a while, right? But in general, we should be paying attention to people. We should be looking at who we're speaking to. We should even be like slightly leaning in and like showing that I'm paying attention to each individual person that I'm paying attention to, right? Because that makes somebody feel like you're caring, like you're putting in effort, right? And so that's where we start with eye contact. But another important thing to do is to match somebody's mood, right? So if somebody is really, really excited about something, like say like you're really excited because you're gonna go see like some show this weekend, right? And you're telling your friend about it, and they're like, "Oh, cool," right? Like that's not matching the mood, right? That's bringing the mood way, way down, right? And you're not being a better listener that way, right? When you're trying to be a better listener, when you're trying to inhabit the felt experience of the person that you're listening to, you want to match their mood. So if they're excited, get excited. If they're frustrated, get frustrated. Don't like start punching walls or anything, right? But like put some energy into your voice, right? If they're like feeling down, feel down with them. If they're feeling nervous, like match that energy. Understand why they're feeling nervous. Feel that feeling with them, right? And now this is like probably not rocket science, right? Like especially when we talk about the excitement issue, right? If somebody's excited, we should be excited with them, right? It can be more challenging when we're talking to somebody and listening to somebody who we really care about, right? And like they're sad or they're scared or they're mad, right? You know, we don't want them to feel that way. We want them to feel better, right? And so naturally we might try and like calm it down, right? Or naturally we might try and like cheer it up or, you know, something like that, right? And I'm not saying that that's a bad thing. I'm not saying that like trying to help your friend or your partner or whoever like get into a better mood is a bad thing. But if you do that right away, you didn't take the time to listen to them, to hear them, and they'll feel brushed off by you, right? And so when I talk about matching the mood, that's a big piece about matching the mood as well. Don't just match the excitement, but be willing to match like the sad sometimes. Be willing to match the frustrated or the confused, right? You don't have to try and fix that emotion right away. And in fact, if you do, that person's not going to feel as listened to, right? So that kind of makes sense what I'm going for with matching mood. Okay, next one is use vocalisms. So I literally just, I wasn't meaning to do that, but I say a lot or like a lot. Listen, I grew up in like Southern California. That's just the way the dialect works. But those kind of individual things that are not even words sometimes, like uh-huh, or or yeah, right? Those tiny little words or parts of words, right? That we might say when somebody's talking to us while we're listening to them, those you shouldn't underestimate, right? Because they help us to show like, hey, I'm tracking with you. You're talking to me. I'm still paying attention. I'm interjecting my uh-huhs at the correct moments, right? And the best part about using these vocalisms, they're also called minimal encouragers to talk, is another psychological way of talking about them, right? These little tiny things that you do, they just communicate as quickly and simply as possible to the other person that, hey, I'm still listening to you. And it's not you doing a whole bunch of talking, right? Because when, like I said before, whenever we're talking, we're inherently not listening, right? And so if you use these minimal encouragers, you communicate your listening to somebody without taking up a lot of their space and time, right? You can kind of think about it like if you were to measure the amount of time in a conversation that you're talking versus the other person is talking, right? The smaller you can get your number down to, like if you're talking 25% of the time or 20% of the time or 15% of the time, right? That shows that you're listening the other like 85, 80, 75% of the time, right? And so I want us to try with all of these things that we're doing today to try and always be thinking about that mathematical equation, right? Like, how can I get out of the way of what the other person is saying? And so those minimal encouragers, those vocalisms are super important. Um, Body posture matters too. I was already kind of talking about this with eye contact, but like you might lean in slightly to the person you're talking to. You might try and show an open posture to them instead of like kind of like closing down on yourself or like looking away and like those kinds of things. Like that doesn't show I'm listening, right? So open up your posture, lean in, make eye contact. You know, you could be relaxed about it. You don't have to like sit up straight and like focus in order to listen to somebody, right? But maybe don't be like lounging away where you're not even like looking at the person, right? That's probably not a good idea, right? And so it's obviously going to depend conversation by conversation, right? Sometimes you're in a coffee shop having a conversation. Sometimes you're like in your dorm room, like late at night having a conversation. There'll be different like body postures that make sense in different situations. But always think about how your body posture is communicating to the person you're talking to that they still matter and that you're still listening, right? And then the last one is idiosyncratic behaviors, right? We all have different like things that we do. Maybe some of you like bat your leg too much while you're like sitting in a spot, or maybe somebody clicks their pen like too much. I like constantly like feel like I'm tucking my hair back behind my ear, even though like it's tied back already. There's nothing to do, but you'll probably see me like throughout this presentation do this quite a bit. It's like one of those weird kicks I have, right? Um, for the most part, these things don't really matter, right? Just be you, just do your best, right? But maybe if you have some like really out there, like annoying things, like maybe try to tone them down a little bit, right? Like if you're shaking your leg so much that the whole like table is shaking, right? Or if I'm just like constantly like fiddling with my hair to the extent where like I'm paying more attention to that than I am paying attention to the person I'm talking to, right? Those things we want to kind of bring down as much as we can, again, because we're not trying to take up space in the conversation. If you're thinking right now, I don't know what my things are. Do I have a thing? I guarantee you do. And hopefully it's not that big of a deal, but ask your best friend. They'll tell you, right? What's my thing? And they'll say, oh, you do this sometimes. You're like, I really do? It's like, no, it's not that bad. But like, you really do that all the time, right? Somebody will tell you. I see some people sharing looks already. Like, talk about this afterwards. Somebody's going to find out something new about themselves. But like, overall, I want to say that those idiosyncratic behaviors usually aren't a big deal. So focus more on the making eye contact, matching mood, using minimal vocalisms, those kinds of things. So it's a whole lot to be thrown at you all at once, right? How are we feeling about this? We're understanding so far. I see nods here. Those of you online, feel free. I should have mentioned before, but go ahead and put stuff in the chat. Jordan is monitoring it for me, and if anybody puts anything in the chat, she can shout it out to me, and I can answer it for the whole group. But yeah, let's move on to the next section. So those are the nonverbal things to listen, right? So now I want to talk to you about the verbal thing. If you're following along in your notebooks here, I think we're on page 5. Right. So I want to talk about questions. I want to talk about paraphrases, and I want to talk about reflections today. But I started with questions because, like, listen, you all know how to ask a question, right? Like, y'all have been asking questions for a long time. I have a 2-year-old daughter, and she asked me why about everything, right? You know, she's 2 and she's already asking questions. You are all somewhere probably between like 18 and 30, something like that. You have been asking questions for a long time, for decades, right? So I don't really need to teach you how to ask a question. They're also in an academic setting. They make you ask questions so that you can learn what you need to know so you can pass the test, right? What I do want to talk about with questions is open-ended versus closed-ended questions, right? So when we're listening to somebody, if we want to make it as much about them and as little about us as possible, right? That's our goal. That's how we act with it. Then when we ask a question, we want to make sure we don't ask a closed-ended question, right? Because a closed-ended question is anything that can be answered with like a yes, a no, or a number, right? Like, were you angry when that happened? Yes, no, right? Are you happy now? Yes, no, right? Do you put yourself down when that happens? Yes, no, right? All of these, the second I ask that question, the person either says yes or they say no, and then it's back on me, right? Now they're looking at me like, all right, I gave you the answer you wanted. Now, what's the next question? Right? You know, like I've totally interrupted the flow of the conversation, right? Because it comes to a screeching halt. And then I, as the person who should be listening, need to then talk again, need to ask another question or encourage them to start going again or whatever it is, right? And so like I have basically like put the brakes on the car. I guess you could use a car analogy. I know I said use a percentage analogy before, but a car analogy could make sense here too, right? Like if I ask a question, I'm turning the steering wheel into whatever direction I want to go to, right? Because also whatever, even if I ask an open-ended question or a closed-ended question, when I ask the question, I'm naturally like telling the other person what I think is important in the conversation, right? They're talking and talking, they're talking about their whole day. They say 5, 6, 7 things, and then I ask a question about the third thing. That shows that I care about the third thing they said, and I don't care about 1, 2, and then 4 through 6 or whatever, right? Like, and so even if you're asking a nice open-ended question that encourages them to keep talking, you know, how did that make you feel? You know, how are you feeling now? Like, you know, those kinds of things still encourage them to keep talking, right? But I'm saying that I care about that specific thing that I'm asking the question about. And maybe they care about that too. I mean, they brought it up to you, they said it to you, right? But maybe the most important thing that they wanted to talk to you about, they haven't even gotten to yet. Or maybe it's not about the individual things, but it's about all the things together, right? Have you ever felt like really overwhelmed in a day before because a million different things all happened at once? Well, if like the person who's listening to me gets really focused in on one tiny thing that happened, and I spend all day telling them about the one thing that like got messed up in my first class that morning, well, then I didn't get to my second class, my lunch, when I went out to later that evening with so and so, blah blah blah, all those other things that happened to me that day. I'm just stuck here on this one thing, right? And so that's why, like, literally, when I was training to be a psychologist, we had to do like a basic like active listening like class, right? So I'm taking this course on this, and we're doing an activity, a role playing activity, and my professor gave us all 3 cards, right? 3 little like index cards, and whenever you asked a question, like took one away from you, right? And so that was to show you that you only got 3 questions in this role play that you're doing. You're trying to listen to this person. Every time you ask a question, you lose a point, basically, right? And I'm not going to do that to you guys because that was like way too intense. But like that's the kind of idea that my professor was trying to get across. She was trying to show that like we need to really limit the amount of questions that we're asking. So, what Nathaniel, you say? If I don't ask questions, then how we have a conversation, right? Like that's how a conversation goes. Somebody says something, somebody asks a question back, right? So if I'm sitting here telling you don't ask questions, what am I telling you to do, right? So if you could give me the next page. Um, what I want to tell you to do is paraphrase. So a paraphrase is something you probably have heard of in the context of writing before, right? All your teachers since high school have been telling you like, don't plagiarize things. You have to paraphrase things. You can't just copy the words out of the textbook that you're reading, right? You have to put it in your own words. Right? That's what a paraphrase means, right? It's basically stating back an idea in a different set of words. So somebody can be telling you about their day and they could say, hey, like, I don't know, I need an example. So I was really frustrated, like, because I like was like 5 minutes late for my shift and like my manager decided to write me up, even though it was like my first time ever being late. And they wrote you up because it was your first time ever. Boom. That's a paraphrase. I said like what, 4 or 5 words there, right? And I have now really communicated that I'm understanding what the person is saying to me, right? Because I've just said back to them literally what they just said to me, right? That's a paraphrase. And then they'll keep going. Yeah. And it was so unfair because, like, Steve is always late, right? And never gets written up because she likes Steve and she doesn't like me and blah, 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 blah. The story keeps going, right? And the story keeps going in the direction that the person I'm listening to wanted to go in, right? Because I didn't ask them a question. I didn't say, like, oh, like, has that ever happened before? Or, oh, what is your manager's name? Or, oh, like, some other unrelated thing, right? I didn't take control of the wheel. I didn't spin the direction that we're going with the conversation, right? I literally just repeated back to them what they said. And now, like I talked about, the two things about listening are to understand from their perspective and to communicate that you're understanding, right? With a paraphrase, they're still talking. So you're still getting more about what's going on with them. So you're understanding what's going on with them better. And they know that you were listening because you were able to say back what they just said to you, right? And so it's the simplest form, it's the easiest form to accomplish both of those tasks of active listening without like derailing the conversation in any way, right? It's important with paraphrases though, like since they're going to be a lot weirder for us because we don't practice doing that. You practice paraphrasing things in scholarly writing, but you probably don't practice paraphrasing things like in a conversation, right? So it's important that like we practice these things a little bit because they're going to feel weird at first. You're going to want to ask questions at first, right? It's going to feel weird to do this paraphrasing. And like some key ways you can do it is like try and use your own words. Don't like literally say back to them what they said to you, right? Paraphrase it into your own words because otherwise you sound like a weird parrot and that's going to be strange, right? The other way is like you want to stick to what they said to you, right? Somebody's going to say something to you, it's probably going to have a lot of implications, right? That person I was talking to about that got written up at work, like that example, that person's probably angry, right? But they didn't tell me they were angry yet. So if I said, and then you got furious at them, right? Like that's not actually a paraphrase, right? That's actually like me suggesting something, right? That's actually a reflection of feeling, which I'm about to get to in just 1 second, right? But like in a paraphrase, we want to stick to what it is that they're telling us, right? We want to stick very much and not make any guesses or inject ourselves into it anyway, right? And also, when you're first starting off doing paraphrasing, like you might start to like somebody says something and you start in your mind trying to think of how you could paraphrase that thing that they said. And then like they're still talking and now like their conversation has moved on and you stop paying attention because you're trying to remember to paraphrase the thing that they said like 5 sentences ago, right? That also is a very common way that we can get off track when we're first learning to paraphrase, right? So just let the conversation be going. And whenever like the person starts to slow to like, a natural point in the conversation where you're expecting to inject something, just paraphrase the last thing that they said. Don't like try and be working on a paraphrase over here and then let the conversation get away from it. Even if it takes you like half a heartbeat to like come up with a way to paraphrase back to it, right? Even if it takes you a second to remember like how you would want to phrase this in more words. That second's fine. That second's going to be a lot less awkward than if when they stop talking, you paraphrase something that they said 10 seconds ago, right? That's going to be way more awkward, right? And so that's what I want you to focus on with the paraphrases, right? Take up minimal space in the conversation for yourself. And if you get flustered, just stick to exactly what they said 2 seconds, right? That's the best way to do all of these things. Hey guys, come on in, grab a packet, and then grab a spot anywhere you want. So if you could take me to the next slide, Jordan. So that's paraphrasing, and that's taking a lot less control over a conversation than questioning, right? Questioning is taking up a lot. Paraphrasing is taking up very little. Paraphrasing takes up just mildly more than one of those minimal encouragers that I was talking about a moment ago, right? But sometimes we need the middle ground, right? Sometimes in order to communicate to somebody that we really care what they're talking about, we're on page 8 now, that we really care where they're coming from and how they're feeling, we need them to talk about their feelings, right? You know, like you all have had those conversations before where you're talking to somebody and you're just like friends or whatever, but you're not like friends like that, you know? And so like you tell them about your day, you say, hey, how you doing? You say, I'm doing good, even though you're having a terrible day, right? You know, like there's this kind of people where you don't get into the emotional quality of something, right? Where you don't really tell them how you're feeling. And that's fine. You don't need to tell everybody in your world all about how you're feeling, right? But if this whole training is being a good listener, an active listener to somebody you really care about, right? You're probably going to be using this in relationships that are important to you, relationships where you do care about how the other person is feeling, right? And so you want them to tell you about their emotions. You want them to share with you, right? And so if that's the case, then we do something called a emotional reflection, right? Or a reflection of feelings. And that's where you basically somebody says to you this whole same thing, right? I was late, 5 minutes late to work, and I got rode up and blah blah blah, all this kind of stuff. You might say back to them if they're just like sort of recounting their day. You might say back to them like, and so you felt blank because blank. You felt angry because she wrote you up like that for no reason, right? But then I'm introducing the emotional words. I'm getting them to talk. I am steering the car a little bit, right? Like I'm gently pulling on the wheel. I'm changing the direction of the conversation, but I'm trying to change the direction of the conversation into the feelings realm, into showing them that it's safe to tell me what they're really going through and how they're really feeling. They don't have to keep it surface level here, right? And so then they might go on and say, yeah, it was just so infuriating because like she's constantly picking on me and this is unfair, blah, 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 right? Whatever that they go on to say, right? But that like reflection of feelings allows that person to open up and shows that you're a person that wants to be safe for them to open up to. Does that kind of make sense what I'm saying? Okay. So one of the things to do with this though, like if you get stuck, it's a little bit weird. Again, you're good at asking questions. You probably have never done paraphrasing before. You probably haven't really done emotional reflections before. So one of the ways that you can really do this is just stick with the you feel blank because blank metaphor, right? You feel emotion word because situation, right? And that will help you structure your reflections and feelings a lot easier. You don't have to like get confused about whatever. You just got to pick an emotion word and pick a thing that they said. Um, the biggest challenges here are twofold, right? I have them here. The first is don't be afraid of the emotion, right? Like I said, emotion is something that's vulnerable to talk about, right? And that's why you want the person you're listening to be able to tell you about their emotions, right? Because then you're actually listening to them, that actually feel heard, that actually feel like you're a good listener and a good supporter, right? But sometimes we don't like emotions, right? You know, everybody likes happy, everybody likes excited, right? You know, people don't necessarily like angry, sad, scared, right? You know, those are not emotions we like to feel, right? And so sometimes we might avoid these negative emotions, right? Because we're like, oh, if I say that to that person, like, then they're going to start talking about how they feel that way, and then they're going to feel that way, and then I'm going to be bad because I made them feel mad or sad or scared, right? But like, that's not a great reason to not talk about it because, like, do you think the fact that you said you're angry because you got written up made them angry? No, like they're already angry, right? You know, like, and so we might be scared to talk about emotions because, like, we don't talk about emotions typically, especially negative emotions, right? But that doesn't mean we're not already feeling them, right? So there's no reason to be scared of something that already exists. Naming it doesn't create it. naming it just allows it to be expressed. And sometimes when we express it, like the simple act of just saying it, like gets it off your chest, right? Have you ever had that kind of thing where you just have like a good heart to heart with somebody, or you have like a good cry about something, or whatever it is, right? Like an expression of emotion, right? Sometimes that in and of itself, like, helps you to feel better, right? And so, like, a reflection of feeling allows that to happen. And being scared of the emotion, right? Being scared of injecting bad emotions into a conversation helps nobody, right? So the other thing about it is being tentative, right? Because when you're saying you feel X kind of way because of Y kind of situation, right? Then I'm telling somebody else how they feel, right? And that can get real awkward real quick, especially if I'm wrong, right? They're going to feel really not listened to, right? Or if I'm trying to impose my thoughts on them, like that's not good, right? We told you this whole thing about listening is about giving them space. So if we take up space saying what we think they ought to feel, then that's no good. That's no listening, right? So you know how like questions end with like an up inflection, right? You could just do that with your reflections of feelings. This is not a question, right? But you could say, you feel angry because she wrote you up? Little tiny question. I put a question mark at the end of that sentence with my voice, even though it's not a question, right? But that shows that I'm holding it tentatively, right? And then I'm willing to be wrong. Now, I probably wouldn't do this on this situation because obviously this dude's mad because they got run up at work, right? But if it's something that I'm a little bit less sure about, right? Maybe I'm having trouble. Somebody's telling me about their like weekend and like all these like negative things that maybe happen. And maybe I'm not sure if they're just feeling exhausted or if they're feeling really sad, right? So those are both very similar emotions, but like a little bit different. So then in that case, I might be more likely to put like that little question mark at the end of it, right? So that they could correct it, right? So, like they might say, I'm less sad than I'm just like exhausted, right? And then I paraphrase that, you feel exhausted, right? Now we're talking about feelings again. Now I've shown that I'm corrected. I don't say, no, 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 you're not exhausted. You're sad. I said so, right? I go back to whatever they said to me, right? But now we're talking about feelings even though I was wrong with my reflection of feeling, even though they said a slightly different emotion, at least now they're telling me about their emotions, which is what we wanted in the first place, which is why we use emotional reflection in the first place. Right? Does that make sense to everybody? Okay. So, next slide, please. Okay, found is on page 10, and accuracy I want to roll is on page 11 for you all. So, if somebody's already talking to you, you're already engaging with them in a conversation, right? And they're telling you, something bad that's going on, right? For instance, the example that we have here in your packet is about like somebody like adapting to school, like feeling very like lonely or homesick, right? And they're telling you about this. I feel lonely. I feel sad. I feel, whatever. And like, that if they were to be able to get out there a little bit more, they'd be able to have the opportunity to not have to feel so lonely, right? And it's hard to put yourself out there, right? That's not just like an easy thing to do, right? And we don't want to give people advice that just feels like it flies in the face of what they're telling us, right? And so if you want to give them that kind of advice, you could try a feel felt found, right? Where you use the different anchors. You explain how you feel what they're feeling, active listening, you get the emotion that they're in. And explain the time you felt that way before. So maybe you went through the same situation as them or a very similar situation to that. And you share about that piece of your life, right? Or maybe you haven't been through the same thing as them, but maybe you've been through something similar, or like a buddy of yours have gone through that, something like that. And so you give some kind of example of somebody else who's gone through that, whether it's yourself or somebody close to you, and what they found to be useful in the end, right? So, for instance, you could say, I understand, like, and I feel how like lonely you are, and I feel how it's so hard to like get out there and make new friends, and I feel how you just want to stick in your dorm, right? And I felt that way too when I was a freshman. I felt like there was too much going on. I was too overwhelmed. Everybody knew everybody else already, and I felt like I just should like not even put myself out there because it was too much work, right? But I found in the end when I joined Outdoor Adventure or BSA or whatever it is, some club organization, insert here, right? I found when I joined this club, like I actually started to make friends that way. And then then I felt more comfortable, and then I felt like I could come out a little bit more. And I felt less lonely, and that being in that club eventually led me to like forming friendships that existed outside of the club, right? And then I slowly got adapted to the university, right? And so like I would suggest like maybe you try and do something similar, right? Like what would you be interested in? What club would you want to join, right? That's feel, felt, found. I feel how you feel. I felt that way before. This is what I found to help, right? And that way you're not coming at it like, bro, you just need to do X, Y, and Z, right? Then I'm not listening to them. They're not feeling heard, and I'm making it sound like so simple when it's not so simple, right? Even simple things can be hard when we're feeling some kind of way about them, right? And so this is feel, felt, found, and I think it's really useful for somebody who's already talking to you, who's already willing to share a little bit about the stressors that they're going through, right? So hopefully you can use that one. But there's probably also, if you can give me the next slide, Jordan, I can't, oh no, this is an example. This is another example, right? I feel how hurt you are about him breaking up with you. And I felt so hurt after my last breakup as well. And I thought nothing would help, but I found that doing things with friends got my mind off of it. So do you want to go to the mall? Do you want to get some food? Do you want to go get coffee? Whatever, right? Feel, felt, found in action, right? Okay. So sometimes though, they're not willing to talk to you. You're just observing somebody and they're like going through it. And you can tell, and they're like texting you less and they're not really opening up. You say, hey, are you all right? And they're like, yeah, I'm all right. They don't really want to talk to you. You're having trouble even engaging in a conversation to begin with, right? That's when I want to encourage you to do I care, I see, I will, I want, I feel, I want, I will. See, I can't even get all my words underneath me right now. There's a lot of prompts here, but the idea is that like you are starting off a conversation by noticing a thing first and bringing the attention to the thing, maybe the thing that they don't really want to talk to you about, in order so that you can address it, but in a way that's not like cruel or calling somebody out, but in a way that's empathic, that focuses on experiencing what they're experiencing, understanding what they're going through, and still making a recommendation for them to, change whatever they're doing, right? So I care, right? Because you care about them, right? I care about you as my roommate, as my brother, as my partner, as my, cousin, whatever it is, right? I care about you and I see whatever it is that's going wrong, right? I see you're doing X, Y, or Z. And I feel worried for you, sad for you, like upset, scared, whatever it is, because they're doing something that you're concerned about. And I want you to take some kind of action to make that better, right? The action that I think would be good advice for you. And then I will help you with that. I'm not just saying you need to go do that. I will help you with that. And how will I help you with that? What are the exact steps I will take? So if you could flip me over to the next slide, I think I have an example on here. So, right, this is like a roommate, right? So we're roommates and I care about you. I see that you've been really depressed and haven't even been able to leave your room in a while, right? And I feel worried about you and I want you to get some help. I want you not to have to feel this way. I will be happy to walk with you over to the counseling center or to the pastoral care office or wherever, right? In order so we can talk to somebody about this so you can get something, so you can feel better, right? And so then you're not just saying, bro, go to counseling, right? You're starting with like all of these things that call out what you're seeing in a gentle way, framing it about you and how you're concerned for them, not that they're messing up or whatever, but that you feel bad for them and that this isn't a way they should have to feel. And then saying, you're not just telling them to go out and do something, you're saying, go out and do this and let me help you do this. Let me, as your roommate, assist you in that way, right? That way, that's the I care, I feel, I see, I want to. Well, just like the feel, felt, found, right? It's not just like saying something out of nowhere. It's focusing on being gentle and empathic and using those same skills we talked about in terms of active listening, right? And really understanding where somebody's coming from in order to then guide them, right? Now we are really taking control of the wheel. We're driving the car or whatever metaphor I'm trying to use that I'm torturing at this point, right? But we're doing it in a way that respects the other person as much as possible. Does that make sense what I'm talking about here? Okay. So I think that's what I have for you today. If you can flip me to the last slide. I typically do a call to action here. I'm not going to put us back in breakout rooms or whatever right now, but I want you to think about all the things we talked about today. Talk to you about a whole bunch of stuff right now. But if you just come to this lecture and you don't use anything out of this, well, you kind of wasted your time. Hopefully you got a Sona credit, or hopefully you got credit for your GD100 class, but like you kind of wasted your time when you hear all this, right? So think about one thing we talked about today. Maybe it was something about, nonverbals, or maybe it was something about, not taking up too much room in a conversation, or even how we should use paraphrase or reflections. I don't care what it is, but think of one thing we talked about today that you're going to promise yourself you're actually going to try. Go try it this weekend with your brother, with your sister, with your partner, whatever, right? Go try it, go do something so that this actually mattered and I didn't just waste your time. All right. Next slide for me, please. If you want to talk more about this, or if you want to talk about any of this stuff, I'm with the Counseling Center. Jordan is as well as a couple of other of us through the room here. It's free, it's confidential. Come anytime, right? If you want to talk more about listening, or you got something else on your mind, come talk to us whenever, right? It's free, it's confidential. We're 24/7 available. Give us a call or come walk into the office during business hours. We're back past the baseball field in the Shire Mods living area, right? We're right next to the health center. So rock up and get your flu shot or whatever, and then also come in and get the stress off your chest. Next slide, please. We don't really need to cover that. If anybody's in an emergency, don't call us, call 911, but that's not really that important right now. But thank you all for being here today. I really appreciate it. Jordan and I are going to stick around for questions as long as we want. So anybody wants to come up, or anybody that wants to put more questions in chat for us, we'd love to have them. But if you